Okay. Hello, my name is Phillip Crawford. I'm an attorney and I'm also the co-chair of the Monterey County Nonviolent Action Committee. I want to thank you for being here and thank you for watching, and I want to thank Wave Street Studios for providing us with this forum. The topic today is how the Trump did this happen, and I'm going to talk for hopefully about 45 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions and discussion at the end. I'm going to start with the assumption that the election of Donald Trump as President of the United States is a catastrophe, a disaster for this country and the world, and anyone who's concerned about human rights, peace, economic, social justice, protecting the environment, economic inequality, should be profoundly disturbed by the prospect of 4 years of Donald Trump. People demonstrating are elected Trump's policies. The demonstrations that happened the weekend that Trump was inaugurated were the largest demonstrations. So there's a need of revulsion, nationality, the policy people we've ever seen in position. One of the things that I want, so we have these millions of rating. How can we figure out what the proper strategy is for this huge movement that's developing? And I think you can tell a lot by looking at history and looking at the types of things that have worked in the past, obviously adjusting them for the present situation. So just as a doctor can't figure out the proper treatment if she hasn't already reached the proper diagnosis, we as activists cannot determine a strategy that's going to work if we don't have a proper diagnosis of the situation. We have to understand the situation we're in, how we got here, and that means understanding the nature of the society that we live in and the way that economic, social, and political power is distributed. Now, it's distributed in a very, very unequal fashion. And if you look back to the beginning of America, America started as a very unequal society. And there was a much larger group of people who had some wealth, and then a huge amount, not only people where most people had no property, there were people who not only had no property, but they were property. Because they were enslaved. And the history of this country, to a large extent, has been the history of disenfranchised, disempowered groups of people fighting for their rights and advancing their rights, and has been an overall historical trend toward greater equality and greater democracy and greater participation by everyone. But that has always been met by resistance by the people in power. And so there's been ebbs and flows. From about the 70s, the trend has been in the opposite direction. There's been a general trend, greater inequality, so that now 1% of the population owns about 37% of the wealth. The next 9% owns about 35%, and the remaining 90% have what's left, which is less than 30%. And many of those people essentially have no. And that's been general since sometime exactly. So one of the things that we've heard a lot about is that Trump won because of demographic shift of white workers from the Democrats to Trump. I think that has been very, very overstated. The truth is that in sheer number of votes, Trump got about the same amount of votes as McCain in 2012, the 27 votes of approximately 27 million white men. And 4 years later, Trump got the votes of approximately 27 million white men. The same than people rural and more likely to be churchgoers. What happened between 2008 and just the midterms, 16, and that's how vote for Obama than they had been in. A lot of information about this. First of all, to point out, they're over white people in numbers. Groups of people, and we've heard this. Oh, the vote for Trump was out of economic distress. He's going to fix the economy, and economic anxiety drove his victory. Again, this is very, very overstated, because if it had been economic distress, well, the most economically distressed group of people in this society are people of color, blacks and Hispanics primarily. They didn't vote for Trump. Voted for a Democrat. So that wasn't what drove people who voted for Trump. What were the top priorities issues? Now, an American's more likely to be killed by lightning than by terrorist. What that is fear of Muslims. And the fact is, Muslims actually tend to be less inclined towards committing acts of violence than people who aren't Muslims. But that doesn't matter. People who voted for Trump voted for him because, including immigration of undocumented people, documented immigrants have lower crime rates. From what drove people to vote for racism, xenophobia, is bigotry, anxiety. And again, if you ask people how they feel about the travel ban, Republicans support it. Republicans overwhelmingly support it. Democrats and independents overwhelmingly oppose it. So it simply doesn't make sense to say that here you've got a guy who ran his entire campaign. His campaign was based on Obama's not an American, his birth certificate's not real, which is a racist trope. Who voted for him were voting because they were concerned about the economy. I mean, it's just overwhelmingly agree with his policies, agree with his racist and xenophobic statements, and that's why they voted for what he's doing, like what he says. They didn't vote for him because they were what he was saying or overlooked. Won the Republican primaries because he was the most blatantly successful attempt to use subtle appeals to white racism in order to win votes in the South. And the Republicans have been using that very successfully ever since. The difference between them and now, the difference between Trump and previous Republicans is that the subtlety's gone. I mean, the guy wasn't subtle at all. He was blatantly racist, blatantly xenophobic, blatantly bigoted against Muslims, and it worked for him. He got the Republican nomination, and then because he was running against Hillary Clinton, he won the election. And because of voter suppression, and because of the Electoral College, which again is a legacy, but that's a topic of a whole other discussion. So why didn't people come out and vote for Hillary? What happened while Obama was president? Now, elected at that point, George Bush was one of the most unpopular, crashed, and we had been at war in Iraq for 5 years, and that war was incredibly unpopular. So the Republican Party, the Republican brand had been incredibly tarnished. Obama was elected. He had, during his first weeks in office, he had a very high approval rating, unusually high for a new president. He had a Democratic majority in Congress. He had a Democratic in both houses of Congress, and the opposition party had been completely trounced and discredited, and many people were wondering, is the Republican Party going to survive? So he was really in a position where he could have acted in the way that many of his supporters were hoping he would act. Well, one of the first things he did was he got together with 13 CEOs of the major banks. And this was a time when essentially most of the people in the country wanted to take these 13 CEOs of the major banks and string them up, because they had just ripped off the economy for millions of dollars, crashed the economy, put people out of work, made people lose their homes. They went to this meeting thinking, Obama's got us over a barrel. Whatever he tells us to do, we're going to have to do it. And according to people who were in the meeting, essentially what Obama said to them was, I'm here to protect you from that angry mob. They're out, they want to skin you alive, and I'm here to protect you. And then, so Obama sided with the people who had wealth and power against everyone else. And this was when he had a majority in both houses of Congress and was riding high with this huge approval rating, could have done whatever he wanted. That should have been a signal to people of what was coming. Now, what came under the Obama administration was there was a recovery. And what recovery means is that somebody made a tremendous amount of money. The economy boomed. But 95% of the income gains during that recovery went to the top 1%. Median income actually fell more during Obama's recovery than it had during Bush's recession. Under Obama, economic inequality increased at a faster pace than ever in U.S. history. He was the best president that the 1% ever had. It was the greatest transfer of wealth from the majority to the already wealthy minority that's ever happened. And yet he was wildly popular with American liberals. And this had a very significant effect because, for instance, policies that liberals, leftists, progressives, Democrats, whatever term you want to use, opposed when Bush was in charge, suddenly became acceptable. So polls showed that the majority of Democrats, once Obama became president, that they endorsed the use of drones to kill terrorist suspects. They even endorsed the use of drones to kill terrorist suspects who happen to be American citizens. The majority of Democrats agreed with keeping Guantanamo open. Even more disturbingly than that, traditionally, African Americans have been one of the most anti-war constituencies in the country. During the Iraq War, the support for the Iraq War was among African Americans was like 7%, whereas the majority of the rest of the country and the overwhelming majority of white Americans were in favor of going to war in Iraq. When Obama proposed bombing Syria, polls showed that still a majority of people were against it, but black Americans were slightly more likely than white Americans to support it. So Obama was successful in turning one of the most anti-war constituency in the country into supporting, being significantly more supportive of war. One of the other things that happened while Obama was president was that the anti-war movement essentially disappeared. There were huge demonstrations against the war when Bush was president. And who went to those demonstrations? Well, a lot of Democrats, a lot of independents, Greens, some libertarians, people who aren't associated with any party, and even some Republicans would be out demonstrating. Once Obama became president and he became in charge of the wars, the demonstrations dwindled in size. It basically, I remember going to a demonstration here in Monterey when he was going to start bombing Syria, and I think there were 12 people there. Now, and so somebody actually studied this, and they found out that what happened, the reason the demonstrations got so much smaller was that people who identified as Democrats stopped going. Now that it was Obama's war, the Democrats didn't go. The people who didn't identify as Democrats kept going, but they were much smaller numbers. So I'm going to wail on Barack a little bit longer here. There were a few other things that happened. For instance, he signed the NDAA, which gave him the authority to indefinitely detain anyone on the planet, including U.S. citizens. He declared that the president had the authority to order the assassination of anybody on the planet, including U.S. citizens, which he did exercise that authority. No president has ever claimed that authority before. He bombed Libya without congressional approval. Before he became president, he said the president can't bomb countries without congressional approval. Then he bombed Libya. He didn't investigate the torture that had happened under the CIA when Bush was president. Even the polls showed that the majority of people thought that the people who carried out that torture, the CIA agents, and there were people who ordered it, should be prosecuted. Obama decided not to prosecute him, not even to investigate this. The only person who went to prison over the CIA torture scandal was the person who leaked it, who leaked the story. He ended up going to prison. Obama prosecuted, or his administration prosecuted more whistleblowers under the Espionage Act than all previous U.S. presidents put together. And as far as the torture goes, Mr. Trump, when he was running for president, said, we're going to bring back waterboarding and worse. Torture works. Now, imagine that when Obama had come into office, the people who had ordered the torture and carried out the torture had all been prosecuted. I don't think Trump would be saying that. Obama also supervised the largest, most intrusive, warrantless wiretapping and surveillance of American citizens ever. And when this was challenged in court, his Justice Department made an unusual argument. Like Bush had argued, well, this is a national security issue. We can't, you can't go into this because it'll reveal national security secrets. Obama's Justice Department went even further. They said that the U.S. government was immune to suits, that you couldn't sue the U.S. government for wireless wiretapping. Now, now this precedent has been set. The president who has and the assassination of American citizens. They maintain a list of people who can be executed without trial. There's no means by which you can find out if you're on the list. The criteria for being on the list isn't public. The criteria for getting off the list isn't public. And his decision about who can be assassinated is not reviewable by any court or by anyone. Now, that was all fine when the president was Obama. But now we have a president, Trump, who has all this power that Obama grabbed for the presidency and now has transferred over to Mr. Trump, and that the vast majority of liberals in this country didn't protest while that was happening. And then to top it off, when he meets with Mr. Trump at the White House, welcome to the White House, he makes his public statement about how we're all on the same team. Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't consider Donald J. Trump to be on my team. And then on undocumented immigrants, everyone's upset, rightfully so, about the mass deportations that are starting. But the Obama administration set records for deportations. Every year, they broke another record for deporting more people than anyone ever before. And I mean, I could go on and on. The U.S. in 1 year tripled its overseas arms sales, with half of those arms sales going to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which the Saudis are now using those weapons to slaughter people in Yemen. Saudi Arabia, which is one of the most repressive governments on the face of the earth. But very little of this was challenged by progressives in this country. Now, all that power has been handed over to Trump with a precedent, with a precedent set that is basically okay. Now, and to me, a lot of this goes to explaining why we're in this mess right now, where we have Donald Trump in office. And the reason is because there's no meaningful opposition to his policies. There's opposition to his party, and there's opposition to his repulsive personality, but the opposition to the policies has been demobilized and gutted and disempowered. And to me, Hillary Clinton ran as essentially saying, this is going to be 4 more years of Barack Obama. I'm going to follow what Barack Obama did, only I'm even more of a militarist, and I'm far less charismatic. But essentially, it's going to be 8 years of the same. Now, 8 years of the same is 8 years of inequality actually increasing, of most people's lives getting harder, of the wealthy people getting wealthier, and the chief executive accumulating more and more unchecked power. So while it doesn't make sense to me that anyone would go out and vote for Donald Trump, it's not surprising that people weren't motivated to vote for Hillary Clinton. Now, a lot of people were motivated to vote for Bernie Sanders because he was addressing a lot of the issues that people really care about. But people weren't excited about going and voting for 8 more years of what they'd just been getting, and and a lot of those people chose to stay home. The people who were motivated were the people who were motivated by racism and xenophobia and bigotry, and they went out and voted. Now, if there had been a organized, mobilized opposition, the outcome could have been different. And so I want to talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. Now, I said that in the past that a lot of American history has been the struggle of the bottom 90% to get a better life and have more democracy, more equality, more inclusion, and more power. And the way they've done this is through mass mobilization, a massive militant mobilization. There used to be a massive militant labor movement, and we used to have sit-down strikes and pitched battles in the street with the police. This is what got us the 8-hour day, got rid of child labor laws, got people the right to strike, the right to form unions, was tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people marching in the street, occupying factories, going on strike, willing to be sent to jail, willing to be beaten by the cops, and sometimes willing to be killed by the cops. And that was what got us all the progressive legislation that happened during the New Deal. It wasn't just because FDR was a nice guy, but it was because he had hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of people in the street outside the White House putting the pressure on him. The same thing happened in the 60s and into the early 70s. Noam Chomsky has said that Richard Nixon was the last liberal American president, meaning that that presidency was really the last time that there was a lot of actually progressive legislation passed. The EPA was created, OSHA was created, affirmative action came in, and that wasn't because Nixon was such a warm, fuzzy guy, because he wasn't. It was because there was a huge movement of hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating for all those things. That's how we got all the war on poverty and Great Society programs that came out in the 60s and then it continued into the 70s. There has been nothing like that until now. I mean, now there are millions of people out in the street. And the challenge for these people, for all of us, is to not only keep that going, but how to channel it in effectively. This society, as I pointed out, is extremely unequal. Most people have very little of any real economic, political, or social power. We do have the power of numbers. And there's a woman, Erica Chenoweth. She's done research and she looked at all the different mass movements and opposition movements around the world over several decades. And her conclusion was that nonviolent movements succeeded twice as often as violent movements. And she also said that once a movement reaches the point where she measured this somehow, 3.5% of the population is actually mobilized, where they are consistently out on the street taking action, that can cause a government to collapse. The critical mass was 3.5%, which in the United States is a little bit over 10 million people. The other thing that we need to bear in mind is that there's been a number of studies about this. I saw this going around a couple years ago. Everybody I knew was sharing it on Facebook. Study finds U.S. is a plutocracy, not a democracy. Did you guys see that study somewhere? You remember that? It was, I think, Princeton, somebody at Princeton. And what these researchers found was first of all, they found that what the wealthy, the top 10%, their priorities are very different from the other 90%. What they think is important is frequently not what other people think is important. They care about the capital gains tax. We don't. So not only did their priorities differ, but Congress only cares about the priorities of the top 10%. I mean, the top 1%, their priorities are very important. The next 9%, their priorities are extremely important. And the bottom 90%, what they want has no measurable impact on legislation. That your representatives in Washington simply do not care what 90% of the people want. What they care about is what the top 10% want. And I think that has some relevance if we want to think about how we are going to be effective. I think that so calling our legislators, sending postcards to our legislators, going to visit them at their office, talking to them at town hall meetings, etc. I'm not saying people shouldn't do it, because everything people do is helpful, and if that's what you can have the time to do, that's great. But I think if we look at the reality of how the system is really working and how it's really set up, that is not what's going to make the difference. If they essentially vote the way that the wealthy want them to vote, getting a bunch of postcards and a bunch of phone calls isn't necessarily going to be the most effective thing. Polls, it happens all the time that people in government vote contrary to what the polls say they want. I mean, Obama did it with the torture. People wanted these torturers prosecuted. He chose not to do it. So the government, the people in government, their decisions are basically based on what the top 1% or the top, and to some extent the top 10% want. The only thing that seems to really work is massive pressure, people in the streets demonstrating. That's what seems to make the difference. So I think I actually spoke faster than I'd anticipated, and I only lost one person. So I think I'm just going to open it up for questions or comments. Do they need a mic? Yes. Okay. I could keep talking, but I thought I'd give you a chance to. I'd love to hear from the person who left, but.
Hi, is this working? Okay. As far as the 3.5% of the population demonstrating, I don't know if the study specifies this, but there are pockets of demonstrations all over the country. Do you think that is as effective, or is it a geographical thing, like everyone needs to be in Washington, or more of a collective demonstration, or do you think that the small demonstrations across the country are just as effective?
I think this study was done I think they looked at, the United States is a huge country. So I think most of the countries we're looking at are smaller countries, and my guess is that most of the demonstrations happened in the major city or the capital city. So I don't know the answer to that. I think it makes it. There are a lot of things about the United States that make organizing more difficult than it would be in other parts in some other countries. Obviously, I think a demonstration in Washington, D.C. definitely has more impact because they're right. That's where the seat of power is. But am I saying that means you shouldn't go out and demonstrate in Monterey on Monday at 3 o'clock at Windows on the Bay? No, I mean, of course I think you do, because I think it has a cumulative effect. They will still know about it. I mean, if they see hundreds of demonstrations all over the country, and I think that still sends a message. I'm not really answering the question. I think Washington is better, but that doesn't mean don't do it anywhere else. It's not going to be meaningless. It's going to be part of the big picture. But we need everyone. We really need everyone doing it. I would tend to think that could be a sign of how well we're doing. That when people in really small towns start having demonstrations, it means we're really onto something, and it is happening. It's starting to happen. So.
Yeah, Phil, the biggest challenge is right now is we have all these demonstrations, different cities and around the country, but there's no media coverage or very little media coverage, and the media concentrate on violence, and so with these peaceful demonstrations, it seems like they're not interested. And
I know that there's a question there.
No, it's not really a question. It's just I'm saying that the challenge is to get the attention of media.
Well, I think getting some media attention is important, but I think we need to. I don't think that should be the focus, because for one thing, now because of social media, you can really circumvent the news. I don't watch the 6 o'clock news. I get my news from the internet, and if there's a huge demonstration and there's one story about it anywhere, everybody's going to send that story around on Facebook, and everybody's going to know what happened. So I don't think the media has the kind of control that they had. I do think that the media is largely, and it really is a tool of the wealthy. It's not controlled by
But most people
us.
still get their news from commercial, corporate-owned media.
Is that true?
I think so, yeah.
Why?
Especially the older generation, they're probably the majority of the Fox News people.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think that getting media coverage is the most important thing in today's world, because if 1 million people demonstrate and the media doesn't cover it, it's not like people in Washington don't know what happened. They're going to know what happened either way. As far as the question of violence, unfortunately, that is true, that violence gets more attention. I don't think, I'm not a strict pacifist. I'm not saying this as a moral issue. I'm just thinking it as a strategic issue, that at this moment, people who would advocate violence as a response to Trump are making a mistake, because it's going to get us, and I'm not saying you're suggesting that, but I think it's going to get us attention, but it's not going to get us the attention we want. And the state has a hell of a lot more access to violence than we do. If we make it a test of physical force, they're going to win. What we have on our side is numbers, and so at this moment, if there is going to be any violence, it's better that it comes from the other side than from us. But I think that some of the demonstrations, if they're big enough, demonstrations do get attention. The Women's March got a tremendous amount of news coverage. It was the lead story on almost every news source I saw. So I don't know. What do you think?
I have
Yes.
a question, and sorry to ask you another question about that 3.5%
number, but it's just so very compelling to think that there's a figure that we can reach that might actually have some demonstrable, proven effects as demonstrated by past resistances. So I guess my question is about this administration's love for distorting those numbers, the numbers of how many people exactly are resisting against their strength and their power. How do you see that affecting the efficacy of, say, hypothetically 10 million people really rising up and being in the streets demonstrating, if the, quasi-state media that we're dealing with coming out of the administration distorts those numbers and refuses to acknowledge them? Does that diminish its power at all?
That's another good question. I go back and forth about. I've never seen anybody lie like Trump. I mean, I'm used to politicians lie. I mean, but I've never seen anyone lie like he lies. He would be. It'd be like me saying, "I'm 6'5" and don't wear glasses." And who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? He'll just say the most ridiculous thing that everyone knows isn't true, and he'll just say it with such confidence, and I can't figure out what is going on there. I don't know if it's some kind of psychological warfare that eventually it's going to wear us down to where nobody will know what's true and what's not true, or if it's just he's just disturbed and can't face reality. I think it makes him look ridiculous. I mean, I've never seen anyone. I mean, he's right in a sense that the media. I mean, they love him because he gets people want to watch the freak show, but the media hates him, and so I think all the lying, the brazen lying, really ultimately works against him. I think he just looks like a fool. He's going to have a certain level of support that's just never going to go away. Right now it's about 40%. When he when the impact of all his bad decisions really start taking their toll, it's going to go down. But he's always going. I mean, Bush still had like 25% approval or something. There's going to be this hardcore of people who are going to back him up no matter what. They don't care what the truth is, but I think overall it's going to hurt him. I mean, I think it will overall it will hurt him because I think some people just stop paying attention to him. But I could be wrong. It could be that it'll have some effect that it's some kind of plan to just psych us out with these.
Hasn't that been a tool of propagandist campaigns in the past of fascist regimes to just keep the populace very confused and overwhelmed and unsure of what exactly is happening as a method of control?
Well, I mean, Hitler, the Nazis were masters of the big lie, and their propaganda. Goebbels said, "The bigger the lie, the better." The bigger the lie, the more people will believe it, because essentially, at some level, people say, "Well, nobody would say something that crazy if it wasn't true." Or so it worked for them. I don't know if I mean, this isn't Nazi Germany. I mean, there are parallels in ways, but I mean, this isn't Nazi Germany. And he may be trying to do that. My gut is that that's not gonna work. I hope.
So I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned the economics during the Obama administration, and in the last 40 years there had not been a change in the medium wage of the medium, and I think it went from $50,000 to $55,000 after 40 years in 2015 in Obama's administration. So it couldn't be that detrimental, right? What he's done.
It hasn't been, it went up $5,000 during his administration? Is that after inflation? Okay. So, I'm not sure I understand the point you're making.
So I was just saying that it seemed like it was like the way you were explaining it earlier. I can't remember word for word, but it was more like a kind of an economic disaster with Trump, being in office with the medium wage and with the medium, how the money went straight to the top and kind of missed out on medium wage earners. So what I'm saying is, if there has been no increase in the medium wage in 40 years, but until 2015, there has been, it's a $5,000 increase, but it's a significant increase given that there has been none in 40 years.
Okay, so there was a 1-year bump?
Yeah, it's still going on today though. Because of that 2015 increase, it's still going on today.
It wouldn't significantly change my opinion. I mean, that is not, I'm not going to dispute the figure because I don't know if it's accurate. Even assuming it's accurate, and I don't have any reason to think it isn't. But you had a tremendous increase in inequality. You had a booming economy with most people not benefiting significantly from that booming economy. There's no disputing that 95% of the income gains went to the top 1%. That there was after 7 years of him being president, that there was a bump that happened. I don't think that, I don't know what caused that bump to happen, but it wouldn't significantly change my overall assessment of the reality. The wages as a percentage of the gross domestic product were at record lows, profits were at record highs. And as far as all the job creation, the majority of the jobs that created were part-time jobs or temp jobs, et cetera. So given the